Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the first convening of the Upstate Mitigation Task Force, Flood Mitigation Task Force. I am Brian Stratton, Director of the New York State Canal Corporation and Task Force Chair. As you know, on July 1st of this year, Governor Kathy Hochul announced signing into law legislation which amended the mission and the scope of the Upstate Flood Mitigation Task Force and named me as Task Force Chair. I want to begin by first acknowledging and thanking those of us who have joined me on the task force. And they include Commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation, Marie-Therese Dominguez, the Commissioner of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Jackie Gray, the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Basil Sagos, Emergency Management and Flood Management Specialist, Bill Neckerman, Hydrologist Theodore and Drenning, Soil and Conservation Specialist Peter Nichols, and Civil Engineering Experts Oren McMurray and Robbie Ravindra. Thank you all for your services and for your individual commitment to our work. I also would like to acknowledge members of the New York State Legislature who have joined us online today. Senator John Mannion, Assemblyman Al Sturpey, and Assemblyman John Lamondes. Thank you for joining us today. The mandate delivered by Governor Hochul to this task force is an important one, and the work that we will undertake is critically important to dozens of communities across New York State. First, we need to explore both the costs and the impact of flooding along the Erie Canal over the past 5 years and across key economic sectors, which we will touch upon shortly. Second, we must assess the canal system's operations, procedures, and plans that may impact flood mitigation and management, and then identify adaptive measures with costs that could be executed to mitigate flood damages. Finally, once we've gathered that information and using the expertise which the esteemed members of this task force panel we will need to deliver a report of recommendations to the governor by July 1st, 2023. This report must outline clear and actionable steps for both the state and local communities to take to prevent future flooding to every extent possible and to mitigate damages caused by future floods. As I mentioned, this information will be critically important to these communities, and I know firsthand how devastating floods can be. As many of you know, I served as mayor of the city of Schenectady for many years. Prior to that, as a city council member and a member of the Schenectady County Legislature. Year after year, our community saw flooding along the Mohawk River and the Erie Canal, caused in large part by annual winter ice jams. These seasonal forces of nature have caused millions of dollars in damage, displaced businesses and families, and harmed the environment and wildlife. But in a small piece of synergy for me personally, here in my role with the Canal Corporation and the New York Power Authority, we've been able to work on tackling the problem. In 2020, we developed a pilot program using a pair of ice-breaking tugs along the Mohawk to break up sheet ice so that it could flow downstream rather than creating dangerous flood-prone jams. So our stewardship of the Erie Canal and specifically flood mitigation as part of our management of the waterway is something that we take very seriously here at the Canal Corporation. The mission of this task force is just as vital to preserving the health and property of our neighboring canal-side communities. Just as in Schenectady, Central New York struggles with flooding are long-standing and have only worsened due to increasing occurrence of severe weather events stemming from climate change. Just one more point before we get started. The solution to the issues we are facing is not a solution that will be driven by a singular agency. Rather, it will be achieved by various authorities and stakeholders working together as a collective. The only way to begin to find a truly effective solution is to establish a shared vision and to execute that vision as a collective. Simply moving flooding from one area to the other is not a viable solution. This is a complex challenge with decades of both flooding and attempting flood prevention for us to examine and incorporate into the solutions we put forth to these communities. This moment demands that we find new and innovative methods to mitigate these disasters and even prevent them, while simultaneously bolstering the resiliency of our waterways, delivering on New York's commitment to environmental sustainability and responsibility. For today's kickoff meeting, we will be examining the work ahead of us to developing a list of task force subcommittees and objectives and planning a preliminary schedule of public meetings and site visits for the next 11 months. Click off that. Thank you all for being with us, and I would like now to give the opportunity for the principal members of our task force to provide commentary, and I would like to begin with DEC Commissioner Basil Stagos. Commissioner, welcome. Good morning.
Brian, thank you, and thanks to all the great members here. It's good to see everybody, including Bill, formerly of DEC. Good to see you, Bill. But this is really important work. The governor kicked us off. We have all been through an intense amount of challenging weather events over the years, to say the least. And I think we all distinctly remember the damages done by various storms and the ice jams in the Mohawk and along the canal system. So we're thrilled to be part of this really important team. I know this is action oriented, which is very important. We're not, basically putting something together to go onto a shelf. This is going to inform the investments we make over the years to come. We've made investments already, of course, but and you're right to detail those, Brian, but we know that the challenge ahead of us is enormous. Managing high water and low water and ice and rain, all the above, because those floods will come. But thank you for having me aboard today. Thanks to the team here. I've also got Tim Walsh, Regional Director out in Region 8, who's going to be part of this as well. You may see some other regional directors as well involved, like Matt Marco in Region 7. But DEC is all in here and happy to be part of this great team. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you and your team for being with us and joining us as part of this effort. I would like to now introduce Commissioner Jackie Bray of the New York State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. Thanks so much. I'm mostly going to echo my fellow Commissioner Stagos. Happy, really thrilled to be part of this team. incredibly important work. One of the things I keep saying is that unlike for many centuries, the weather of tomorrow is no longer like the weather of yesterday. And so we have to not only prepare and deepen our understanding of what we need to do to prepare, but we have to imagine possibilities that we didn't think could be real even a decade ago. We're seeing that in particular in inland flooding, but also in drought conditions. And so I think that it's really timely and really critical, and my team will be here to support however you need us in terms of talking about preparedness plans and response capabilities.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you. And also with us representing Department of Transportation Commissioner Marie-Therese Dominguez, we have Jim Flynn, who is the Deputy Chief Engineer for Structures. Mr. Flynn, good morning.
Good morning. Happy to bring our experience with DOT to this expert panel. Obviously, with DOT, we have a lot of experience dealing with resiliency and building stronger infrastructure. This is a very important task force that's been put together, and just echo everybody else's sentiment. It's glad to see it's action oriented, and we're going to develop a product that can be implemented, and happy to be part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. We look forward to working with you and with Commissioner Dominguez going forward. I would like to go now to the other members of our task force, two of whom are with us in the room. In Emergency Management and Flood Management Specialist and former DEC employee, Bill Neckerman. Good morning, Bill.
Thank you, Brian. And I'm honored to be part of this task force. A little background, I have 25 years experience in floodplain management, including 20 years of that at the DEC with their floodplain management section. And a couple things about flooding from my background is, number one, the water has to go somewhere. And Brian made comments along those lines. We can't just move the floods from one place to the other. There's two ways of preventing flood damages. You can keep the water away from the people and infrastructure, and you can keep the people and infrastructure away from the river. Right. And hopefully our approach will be some hybrid of that. So I look forward to working with this group over the next year.
Thank you very much, Bill. Also with us here in our conference room in Albany is Soil and Water Conservation Specialist Peter Nichols. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Brian. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody. I like Bill. I'm honored to be on this board. Just a quick background story on me. I come from a fisheries background. Spent most of my time learning about ecological impacts of what we do to the rivers and streams, and spent 9 years as the Mohawk River Coalition chairman, which is kind of a boots on the ground action program where we're taking DEC's action agenda and putting a lot of those ideas and recommendations into action. So we spent millions of dollars doing mitigation work. I am from Schoharie County. And even though we're kind of outside of the footprint of the auspices of this group, we did a lot of work in Schoharie County with addition of stream gauges through FEMA block grants. And obviously we survived Irene and probably 10 or so microbursts, isolated storm events since then. So our focus has been on, as DOT has spoke to, increasing our infrastructure resiliency, making sure our culverts and bridges are upsized. As a matter of fact, when I leave here, I'm going to look at a New York Rising project that we are acting as subrecipient for in a village of Middleburg. Making a conveyance that is not designed to handle anything larger than a 5-year storm event, large enough to handle a 100+ year storm event, which protects Middleburg's business sector. So my attire shows I'm going to be putting on a vest and a hard hat in a little while and going out and seeing how my contractors are doing. So appreciate the time and the opportunity to bring my skill sets to the table with this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and we also will be putting our part and invest as we get out into the field in future meetings of the task force. I'd like to now go on screen to another named member of our task force, hydrologist Theodore and Trenny. Ted, good morning, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I am a hydrologist. I'm a water resource engineer, and I'm happy to be of service to this task force to make sure that we balance our water budget and consider the physical drivers at work.
Thank you very much. Also rounding out the task force, we have two civil and engineering experts, and I would like to begin first with Orrin McMurray. Orrin? You might be on mute. Orrin, it might be.
Can you hear me at this point?
I can hear you. Yes, thank you. Good morning.
All right, sorry about that. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Orrin McMurray. I'm a professional engineer, and I've practiced in New York State in the infrastructure engineering area, including water resources and the like, for a little over 45 years. So it's a privilege to participate in the work of this very important task force, and I look forward to supporting the results that we will generate here in the upcoming months.
Thank you very much, Orrin. We are delighted to have you working with us, and finally, we'd like to recognize and introduce also another civil and engineering expert and a member of this task force, Ravi Ravindra from Rochester. Good morning, Ravi.
Morning, Brian. My name is Nagappa Ravindra. I go by Ravi. I'm the president of Ravi Engineering, representing 90 employees in Rochester, Albany, Binghamton, and Buffalo areas. In business for 27 years, working on civil, structural, environmental, and surveying projects. Most of our work are related to infrastructure projects throughout New York, and in particular, we have jumped in to help with many of the flood inspection, design, and support after storm events. So very honored to serve on this task force. And personally, I have lived in Syracuse for 10 years and 32 years in Rochester area, and our employees are heavily invested in the upstate New York region. So I'm truly honored to serve on this task force and will assist with any of the activities associated with the task force.
Thank you very much, Ravi, and thank you, task force members. And before we go any further, I'd like now to recognize and hear from the members of the New York State Legislature that have joined us today. And we will begin with Senator John Mannion. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Director. Thank you so much. This is an exciting day for me. It's great to see everyone. I don't want to take up too much time because I know that there's important work and I don't want to get in the way, but I do want to thank my legislative colleagues, Assemblyman Sturpey, of course, who was sponsor on the Assembly side, and Assemblyman Lamondes. I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Goebel, Director Stratton, and Ms. Hughes, who were in attendance in Cato, New York, on a day where it was a very professionally run meeting. People got a lot of good information, but more than anything, they know that the state of New York and our agencies and corporations and leadership is engaged, that they're a priority, and that we are committed to trying to do what we can to alleviate what is, going to be, as many acknowledged, an ongoing crisis. So it's an exciting day for me. I thank you all for your full commitment to those folks and for the betterment of our state going forward. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Senator. We too recall that gorgeous day, that gorgeous Saturday in Cato, where we thought that many people would have other plans, baseball games, barbecues, yard work, and yet nearly 200 people turned out for that that open meeting. So you see what the need and what the passion is. So thank you very much. I would also now like to move on and introduce Assemblyman Al Sturvey. Good morning, Assemblyman.
Good morning, Brian. First of all, I want to especially thank you for taking on the task of being the chair of this group. Back in 2017, when I and Senator Valesky at the time passed the legislation to create this task force, we made the mistake of not naming a chair, and we were going to have the members vote on a chair, and that never quite happened. So now we at least know that these meetings are going to happen. There is going to be a report, and you know, I want to thank all the experts that have been brought together for this. You know, I continue to get phone calls all the time, every time it rains, because people's backyards are disappearing and their basements are flooded, and you know, there's all sorts of havoc that's wreaked all over my district. So I'm especially glad that we finally got this kicked off. Again, I want to thank my partner, John Mannion, for carrying the legislation, and John Lamondes for supporting the legislation. And I want to say a special hello to a couple of people I actually recognize here, Matt Marco and Orrin McMurray, friends that we've worked together for on a lot of different things over the years. So really looking forward to this and waiting for the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. I view my role as chair as really one to make sure that these meetings happen and that we stay on course, but really all of the work is going to be done by all of us working together. As I said in my opening comments, it's not any one agency, it's all of us working together towards a common solution and toward that report, which we will send to the governor in about 11 months on July 1st, 2023. So thank you. And finally, we'd also like to introduce Assemblyman John Lamondes. Good morning, Assemblyman. Assemblyman, can you hear me?
Good morning. I thought you were going to unmute me. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all again. I'm very glad we were able to get this task force going, and I just want to thank you all, those of you whom I met at the meeting in Cato, and those of you who I'm meeting for the first time, so to speak, today. It's a pleasure to be working with you, and I'll yield the balance of my time to the substance of the meeting on behalf of the clients or the constituents that I have whose properties are flooding probably right now as we speak, potentially.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Assemblyman. We are happy to have you with us, and both Assembly members and the Senator were with us at our earlier meeting this summer in Cato, and we know that they're totally committed to this very important task. I would now like to turn the floor over to our Senior Director of Public Engagement, Rebecca Hughes. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, thank you. Thank you to all who are on the YouTube live stream this morning. I know that that was interrupted. Thank you, Maureen Doyle, for calling that out. I followed up with IT and the live stream is now running. For those that are on the YouTube live stream, if you have questions, those can be emailed throughout this meeting to Shane Mahar, who is our Public Information Officer. His email is currently listed on the screen. And whether you have questions during today's meeting or later, please send those to Shane and we'll be sure to be responsive. In terms of just some housekeeping items, we'll go through the presentation. We hope to have some time for open discussion, though there is a lot of substance to cover in the kickoff meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be published to a dedicated website on the Canal Corporation webpage, along with any materials that we reference, so that we have an open and transparent process going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Ramsey, who leads legislative affairs for NIPA, to just go over very quickly the legislation history and scope. And here's the members of the task force again that Brian already introduced.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to just take a few minutes to provide you with an overview of the legislation and why we're here today. As Brian had mentioned earlier, on July 1st of this year, Governor Kathy Hochul signed legislation, Chapter 370, takes effect immediately, creating the Upstate Flood Mitigation Task Force. Next slide. Here's a brief overview of the legislation itself. Bill number A91773, Assemblymember Sturpey, S8204A, Senator Mannion. Little history behind where we are today. The Upstate Flood Mitigation Task Force was created in 2017, but was not convened. Legislation extending the sunset to 2023 was signed into law in the summer of 2021. Now, as we all know, there have been several flood-related events over the past few years, as well as growing community concerns and a push from elected officials to revive this task force. In late 2021, we were asked to take steps to get this legislation back in the queue. Several steps were taken, including getting input from this group here today, meetings with the sponsors of the bill, Senator Mannion and Assemblymember Sturpey, as well as its executive chamber staff. I'll provide you with some of the revisions, as the Assemblymember mentioned earlier. This one, it designates the director of the Canal Corp as the chair of the Upstate Flood Mitigation Task Force. It refines scope to watersheds where the Erie Canal System operation procedures relate to flood mitigation and management, which are the Mohawk River Basin and the Oswego River Basin. The provisions. Section 1, it amends subdivision 5 of section 139A of Canal Law to clarify that the task force will focus its study on areas that the Erie Canal passes through. Section 2 amends subdivision 2 of section 139B of the Canal Law to designate the director of the Canal Corporation as chairperson of the task force. Section 3 amends section 139C of Canal Law to require the task force to produce a report on or before July 1st, 2023. Section 4 adds a new subdivision section, new subdivision 6 to section 139C of Canal Law to require the task force to meet 4 times prior to the report being published and once a year after the report is published. Section 5 pushes out the sunset of the task force from July 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2024. Section 6 is the effective date, as I mentioned earlier, Chapter 370, July 1st, 2022. Task force membership. Legislation. Do we have that?
Yeah, I do. I moved it up earlier.
Okay, just to go back, the task force membership, legislation prescribes 9 task force members. Director of Canal Corporation is the task force chair, Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, Director of Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, 5 additional members, 3 appointed by the governor, 1 by the temporary president of the Senate, and 1 by the Assembly Speaker. Focus of the legislation. It's tasked, among other things, to prepare a report by July 1st, 2023. Legislation identifies the following areas to be addressed: the cost or impact of flooding over the last 5 years to agriculture, transportation, infrastructure, land use, public health, insurance, tourism, recreation, and power generation. Assessment of the canal system operation, procedures, and plans which may impact flood mitigation and management. List of adaptive measures with costs that could be executed to mitigate flood damages. Establish an upstate flood mitigation grant program to mitigate and prevent flood damage in the target regions. Duties of this task force are to review existing reports and studies on the flood-prone areas within these watersheds, identify gaps in available data and analytics, establish the parameters of a grant program as defined in the legislation, and make recommendations on how to mitigate flood impacts. Now, the limits of the study and grants program. Jurisdiction. Task force can provide recommendations for action, but New York State does not have the authority over other water management authorities or municipalities. Funding. Terms of the grant program must be defined, and funding will be part of future deliberations. Just to give you an idea of the watersheds, given the photo, the Oswego River Finger Lakes is the largest one, 5,122 square miles. And the Mohawk River at 3,460 is the eastern part of this watershed.
And with that, we'll turn it over to Howard Goebel, our hydrologist, who will give an overview of the regional hydrology.
Thank you, Rebecca. As Director Stratton mentioned, we're focused on the Mohawk River Basin and the Oswego River Basin, and I really think this these two photos are illustrative of the tale of two watersheds. The Mohawk River watershed, Mohawk River watershed is very flood prone, but it's flood prone largely due to flash flooding. And whether it's a snowmelt runoff event or a hurricane remnant event, water levels can rise very quickly, cause widespread scour damage and high water, and then recede rather quickly, leaving destruction in its wake. To the contrary, the Oswego River Basin, here a photo from Cross Lake from last year, is very flood prone nonetheless, but it's more of a static flooding. Water levels of the canal and the lake overspill its banks and inundate flood prone areas where development has taken place, and the water levels remain high for weeks and months. And I believe we are above bank full level for 4 months between November and February last year. So it's just a much different watersheds. We're going to drill down through the two watersheds. Starting with the Mohawk River Basin. The Mohawk River Basin has the canal running right through it. The canal flows on this graphic from left to right or west to east. And the drainage from the Adirondacks there where Delta and Hickory Reservoir were built, special purpose built for canal water sources to operate and maintain the existing canal system, drain in, and it's quite different in elevation. Over this 100-mile long distance of the canal, the elevation change is about 400 feet. So there's a lot of gradient here, kind of as referenced through the graphic in the lower left-hand corner showing the elevation change. So we have the Adirondack Mountains contributing runoff. We have Schoharie Creek with the Catskill Mountains contributing runoff, and watersheds big enough at nearly 3,500 square miles that parts of the watershed, fortunately, generally only receive rainfall runoff at the same time, and it's big enough where generally we don't see uniform rain falling over the whole basin, which is a real positive thing. But there is flood-prone issues nonetheless, and we're going to discuss what they are and see what some of the things that are done to mitigate that have been. Here's a graphic created by Dr. John Garver from Union College. He's done a great deal of study on the Mohawk River, which kind of tells a bit of a story of flooding between when the canal came into place in 1917 through 2008. And it shows largely the Mohawk from a total annual volume perspective behaved itself, with the exception of a few little odd occurrences in the 40s. 1945, I believe, was an issue where we had then flood of record occurred, but then went into a long drought period during the 60s where things were really bleak. The canals had a tough time operating due to a lack of water. Hurricane Agnes came in to play in the early 1970s, and it was wet for a few years, but largely through the 80s and 90s, the watershed was generally pretty tame. But in 2006, the canal system had quite a Mohawk River Basin system had a large flood. Canal had over $25 million of damage to its own infrastructure in 2006. And it started leading to say, boy, what can be done to mitigate this damage? We got federal declaration, disaster declaration of the 2006 storm, but it was difficult to implement because we really didn't have a plan. So we started a plan. As Pete mentioned, 2011 Hurricane Irene really was detrimental to the Schoharie Basin and the areas downstream in Montgomery County, Schenectady County, Albany, and Saratoga counties, and it was the flood of record for the basin in those areas. And there the canal had over $125 million of damage to its own infrastructure, with over $1 billion of damage throughout the watershed. Those high flowing flash flood type of damages were just amazing. Director Stratton and I went and toured all the counties. Every time we went to a different county, we were amazed by how bad it was. We thought we hadn't seen this before. It was different, but it was bad wherever we went. And so we said, boy, we need to have a strategy here, how we can mitigate flooding. In 2019, Hinkley Reservoir had its flood of record. During a Halloween storm in the fall, and the East Canada Creek was damaged severely. And then last year, Rome and Delta Reservoir had its flood of record. So we're definitely in a what period of time, and a call to action has been made. Fortunately, the Mohawk River Basin has the Mohawk River Action Agenda in 2021. The 5-year revision was issued. And the mission of the Action Agenda is pretty clear: to conserve, preserve, and restore the environmental quality of the Mohawk River while helping to manage the watershed's resources for a sustainable future. It was initially issued in 2009. It's been revised several times. All through that, flood resilience and mitigation has been a strong anchor pillar of the Action Agenda. As we work with the task force, we want to build upon the work that the Action Agenda has done and has underway to really target our next steps as they relate to really watershed management infrastructure throughout the basin. We'll switch over to the Oswego River Basin, a very large watershed, larger than the state of Connecticut. As highlighted on the slide, we show Cross Lake, where the picture was taken earlier. It's along the Erie Canal in Onondaga and Cuba counties, and it's really a widening of the Seneca River that existed long before the canal was built. Interestingly enough, the Cross Lake was actually 11 feet higher prior to a draining of the Montezuma wetlands in 1852, which lowered it 7 feet. And then with the construction of the barge canal in the early 1900s, was lowered 4 more feet to create the gradient for the Erie Canal going through it. So quite a bit of changes have gone underway for Cross Lake. Some of the challenges of this basin, I think we look at the graphic, shows the elevation changes. Some mountainous areas in the Allegheny Plateau and in the Tug Hill Plateau with Oneida Lake, but rather flat watershed along the spine of the Erie Canal. So some real challenge. The real challenge is the lakes are operating independently. Been operated for years. Every lake has its own task force. They've developed their own watershed management plans. They have their own nice targeted water levels that they want to have for the summer levels, a drawdown period in the fall, a winter period, and then transitioning to in the spring back up to normal summer levels. And in general, things work pretty good. But given climate change and its influence, along with other things, it's been challenging because sometimes now the snow, which used to melt in April, is now melting in February. And the lakes are already at summer level in February. So now when we get those spring rains, we're already at a full level. So that independent operation is rather challenging. Fixed system hydraulics. The Erie Canal was built 104 years ago, went into operations, but the hydraulics are the same. And they're limited. They were limiting when they were built. And they're limiting today. Floodplain encroachment. I think Bill mentioned, and he's correct, people have built in the floodplain. And that's why we have flooding going on. And some very flood prone areas along the lake shores and along the spine of the canal system as well. And you mentioned climate change, but there's also been a great deal of development in the watershed throughout the 100-year period of the canal operations. And what that has done is really created a situation where the same rainfall results in more runoff and higher watershed yield due to a transformation largely of woodlands and farmlands to strip malls and subdivisions. And kind of the graphic in the bottom right corner of the map here kind of shows the urbanized areas. And there's been quite a transformation over the years. And those transformations continue. Syracuse is largely developed, but there's been a huge move of people outside of city of Syracuse throughout Hunterdon County. And so those urbanization of formerly undeveloped lands, that's definitely created a water management challenge, as well as limited forecasting. I started my job here as canal hydrologist in 2001, and there was zero flood forecasting in this basin. It was almost tough to believe. And over the years, we've added many, many gauges, real-time gauges with the USGS, gauges of our own, precipitation gauges with the New York Mesonet. And we've started to finally have some forecasting in the basin, but it is limited. And the reliability is still in progress, but certainly something in progress that we're looking forward to improving over the years. The geologic features, as I touched upon, are really shown well in this slide. The Lake Ontario Plain is a expansion of the kind of a former Lake Ontario Great Lakes that existed prior to the last ice age. And when it receded, it carved into the Allegheny Plateau, and the Allegheny Plateau used to drain to the south. But when it receded, now it drains to the north. And so all of that water in the watershed drains now to the north, and now we have to manage that. Likewise, the Tug Hill Plateau, which is the largest contributor of runoff to the Oneida Lake watershed, largely because it gets over 10 feet of snow each year. And when that snow melts, we have high water levels on Oneida Lake, so water management is rather challenging there as well. So this kind of frames out some of, these aren't just management issues that we can deal with, but actual geologic features that we have to work with. This is a slide that is a cross section of the watershed, and really generally along the spine of the Erie Canal, kind of moving from right to left through Oneida Lake. The canal runs through, and it drains to the west and joins at the Three Rivers Junction, which is really the junction of the Oneida River, the Seneca River from the west, and the outlet is the Oswego River to the north. From the west side of the watershed, we have the canal and the Clyde River, and then ultimately the Seneca River, which drain from the east to the west, joining the Three Rivers. And once it joins the Three Rivers, and we get past Lock 01 in Phoenix, the canal is very steep. And so we get past Lock 1, and it's really like a gorge, and water can flow generally freely. There's hydropower facilities each one of the locks, but largely because of the gorge nature of it, the development hasn't occurred, and flooding issues aren't a challenge. We're gonna focus on kind of the real rub here is how flat the Seneca River is between Baldwinsville and Cuba Lake, a 32-mile distance. But as of today, there's only 6 inches difference in water elevation between Baldwinsville and Cuba Lake with no dam in between. And that gradient is largely a function of the low flows and the slope of the canal, which is largely as flat as the table or the desk you're sitting in front of. And so it provides some real challenges. And kind of mentioned Three Rivers before, 90%, 6% of the watershed drains through Three Rivers. So it really is a bottleneck with water flowing from both the Seneca River from the west, the Oneida River from the east, and then hitting a kind of a stopping gap at Lock 01, and water does back up greatly through that point. Seneca River portion highlighted in the shaded area is the flattest, slowest moving portion of the New York State canal system from a riverine perspective, and largely the most flood prone because from a hydraulics perspective, the fixed hydraulics I referred to previously has to go through this flat area. And so what happens, the water level rises up to its bank. As flows increase, it rises out of its banks and stands not in a swift through moving flash flood area, but stagnant water, which has great impacts on wells, septic systems, roadways, people's homes. And because it lasts for so long, it's really problematic. Now, I want to draw attention to each of the finger lakes here. It's a great graphic. Oneida Lake is right along the canal, so there's really limited gradients between Oneida Lake and its outlet. Likewise with Cross Lake, it's part of the Seneca River and the gradient is flat. But the next lake is Cuba Lake, which the Canal Corporation regulates. Pretty flat. The outlet of Cuba Lake is generally 9 feet, 9 feet today, based on normal operations. But during flood flows, the water level rises in the Seneca River, and we generally get down to about 1.5 foot difference between the Cuba Lake level and the Seneca River, thus showing widespread overbank flooding and an inability to really regulate well because the whole system is in a dynamic flood state. However, the other finger lakes are all upland, and they can release water, I mean, really upland. They can release water unimpeded, and their outlets occur, and they open up valves, and they flow down through their own streams, ultimately all coming to the confluence of that flat Seneca River portion between Baldwinsville and Cuba Lake. Hence, that's why it's the most flood-prone area. So what happens in this large 5,100-mile watershed? All this flow coming from different directions, all joins into the canal system, and then flows out to Lake Ontario through the Oswego Canal. But there's a great deal of water management issues, a lot of hands on water, and a lot of efforts have been taken in place to minimize the flooding that occurs. But it's challenging because there's so much water. Bill mentioned directly, the water has to go somewhere. And so all that water falling within this watershed and draining through these common outlets creates this pervasive issue of overbank flooding that we deal with on a routine basis. Here are the water management facilities and entities, and I'll just go through them quickly because I think it's worth touching upon them. Cuba Lake is operated by the Cuba Lake Outlet Compact, a jurisdictional body that was formed in the several county area to regulate Cuba Lake water levels. And they do have taxing ability and have a water management program. It's very robust, but they're managing water levels for Cuba Lake and for their own constituents. They release water into Seneca Lake. And so whatever those water releases are in Cuba Lake, they have to be done into Seneca Lake, which is regulated by Gravity Renewables, a hydropower entity who holds a Federal Energy Regulatory or FERC Commission license, which has specific parameters that they must maintain seasonal water levels and regulate the water flowing in through their own watershed in Cuba Lake in their outlet, which ultimately discharges into Cayuga Lake. Owasco Lake is regulated by the city of Auburn, and they maintain Owasco Lake levels seasonally. Skinny Atlas Lake is regulated by the city of Syracuse, largely for the public water supply, as as a source of the city's water. Otisco Lake is regulated by the Onondaga County Water Authority and maintaining water levels in accordance with their water management plan to have stable drinking waters to their customers they serve. Canandaigua Lake is managed by the city of Canandaigua, and they seasonally regulate their water levels. But looking at this watershed being so big, you can see how portions of this watershed can be inundated. I mentioned earlier, Oneida Lake had 4 inches of water fell in the Tug Hill Plateau yesterday. Tough to imagine that, but the rest of the watershed largely had rain at all. It was raining out there this morning, but other parts of the watershed didn't see any rain. And so you can be in a watershed downstream, especially since you don't understand why it's flooding, but we can have literally heavy rainfall flowing through the Finger Lakes and along the canal, the sun could be shining. So I think it kind of tells a good story about combined watershed management. A lot of people have their hands on it, but once the water gets into the canal system, it's a different set of entities who have watershed management responsibilities. Lock 24, the Canal Corporation owns and operates a dam in Baldwinsville. It has a single Tanger gate, which is used to regulate water levels of that Seneca River through Cross Lake. But also the Brookfield Renewable Power and Northline Power also run separate hydropower utilities, Brookfield on the north and Northline on the south, which have 2 units each, which they regulate water levels and regulate water through. And these facilities, largely during high flows, are known to plug with debris and reducing the capability and the hydraulic capacity at that critical juncture point. At Lock 1, Eagle Creek Renewables regulates the 4 of the Tainer gates on that particular dam, along with 2 hydropower units, and directs the Canal Corporation how to regulate 2 of the Tainer gates as well. So a lot of coordination goes on here. On the Oswego Canal, Brookfield Renewables runs hydropower units at each lock, with the exception of Lock 06 High Dam, which is operated by the city of Oswego. And a great deal of regulation is done with the flows on the Oswego, largely because it's so steep. The water levels can rise quickly and go from no flow to high flow. So there's a great deal of coordination there. The Cuba Lake, I mentioned previously, is regulated by the Canal Corporation. And this has to be done with great coordination with the flows upstream and the flows downstream because of the intersection of the Seneca River downstream. During the flood of record in 1993, the water levels were so high on the Seneca River that the gates, the 6 Tainer gates at Lock 01, were actually opened to let the water level flow backwards into Cuba Lake as a flood relief. So the water levels there were 12 feet above normal. And that was done really to protect the Tainer gates, as they would have been damaged if they overtopped in the reverse direction. And lastly is Oneida Lake. Canal Corporation regulates the Codnoy Dam during the navigation season. This is generally, the navigation season is generally made through mid-October, but the Tainer gates are regulated in the spring following the spring freshet, whenever that may be. And only once during my tenure have we actually had to put the gates in to bring the water level up in the spring. Usually it's at high water levels, and we do our best to coordinate and see how long it's going to take for the water levels to naturally drain without regulation. But on December 1st each year, the gates are fully removed, and the Oneida Lake management really reverts to a run-of-river condition, and rainfall and runoff occur until the post-spring freshet period. So as you can see, there's a great deal of mitigation that goes on.
Can you back up on that slide? I mean, this is probably one of the most important slides in your deck. In our deck, and you're showing 12 or 13 individual authorities or management organizations who have different protocols for controlling flow. So obviously, the task that this task force is going to be looking at is what can we do to collectively and cooperatively work with all of these various entities to be able to handle this problem. And the line at the bottom of the slide, of course, is to underscore the fact that the Canal Corporation is only one of many water managers across the region. I think that's a very important slide.
And touching upon that, Brian, Canal Corporation has a great deal of coordination. We have we call it the Lake Manager Plan. Every Monday, we coordinate with all the Finger Lakes management and say, hey, what are you guys doing? So we know. And when gate changes are made and planned, we ask them to coordinate with us. It works really well, except during floods. And during floods, they let us know what they're doing, but they're generally operating without taking into consideration the consequences of their actions and actions of others are into the downstream flood prone area. So,
well, they all go into their own emergency management. What's in their backyard.
That's right.
And not collectively what it's doing to the entire watershed. So this is a very important slide for us to look at it, keep in mind. And I know we're going to go on to our next element. I wanted to
just in closing that, there is a high flow management plan that exists with Eagle Creek Renewables at LACO 1 and Brookfield Renewable Power at LACO 2, where the Canal Corporation is only the gatekeeper. They're mandated by the FERC license to have this coordination plan. And it's complex. We won't get into all the whys, hows, and whats, but when water levels seek certain levels and flows on the Oswego Canal exceed certain thresholds, they have a voluntary program to reduce the water levels upstream of LACO 1 and LACO 2. So the Canal Corporation does serve in a coordination role, but as many managers here do make this rather challenging.
very good. Let's repeat the email address for those who might want to send in questions. It might have been obscure. Go to send your questions and comments to Shane Mahar. That's Shane, SHANE .Mahar, MAHAR @ NYPA.gov, NYPA.gov. Shane Mahar at NYPA.gov for questions and comments. Rebecca, are you moving on to the next slide?
I'm continuing, Brian. No, it's all good.
Go ahead.
I just want to talk about some of the studies and mitigation efforts underway. It's not like we exist in a vacuum and haven't been doing a lot of work here, but wanted to touch upon a few things. New York State Flood Risk Management Guidance for implementation of the Community Risk and Resiliency Act signed in August of 2020 was a very needed document. It provides guidance to state agencies on consideration of flooding risk by applicants for projects involving new and substantially improved structures in New York State. And the guidance serves as an interim step in the ongoing incorporation of climate change related considerations and requirements into relevant DEC and other agency regulatory and funding programs. And generally, it's followed large part through the work that Bill Meckerman did when he was the chair of the Bureau of Flood Protection to look at elevation rise in development to mitigate flooding as a strategy to ensure that development isn't continuing to occur in flood-prone areas. The center photo is a photo of the Canal Corporation's movable dams. You see these along the thruway along the Mohawk River. And these were special purpose built gates, boulet type gates. So the only gates from 1880s Czechoslovakia technology, the only gates in the world that still exist of that technology. And following the Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Henri and the damages that took place in 2001, when these were essentially taken out of service. They were damaged to a point where they had to be reconstructed, and the canal was closed for 74 straight days before we could get boats through. But we did modify them with a $30 million grant from FEMA as part of the disaster recovery. And now the dams can be preemptively raised in anticipation of a major flood event. They've been raised 15 times since the fixes were in place for last year due to the high cyclonic activity of hurricane remnants. But since that's done, that happened, the Mohawk River has stayed within its banks. Where I mentioned the flood record occurred with Eagley Reservoir and East Canada Creek. If the dams, did some modeling, if the dams were in and not pulled, we would have had water, it would have been record flooding, we would have actually exceeded flood damages that occurred in Hurricane Irene, but for the pulling of those dams upstream of the confluence of the Schoharie Dam, Schoharie River, it definitely provided a great deal of flood mitigation. And lastly, Brian touched upon the ice breaking work that's being done, but it's only part of the program. The New York Power Authority, working with the Canal Corporation, has a ice jam flood mitigation program at Lock 07, the Fisher's Ferry Dam, to modify the dam in concert with the ice breaking activities that have begun to attempt to mitigate the widespread and routine flooding that occurs in this Schenectady stockade region. And those efforts are underway. We believe we'll be going with a recommendation next month for design. And we have a $30 million mitigation grant program ask to FEMA for this program, along with a study for flood resiliency in the Utica Rome region as well. And those are underway, being evaluated by FEMA as we speak. So there are things that are underway, and don't want to say that nothing has happened, but they do move rather slowly. And we've taken some opportunities with this widespread disasters and disaster declarations by FEMA to get funding to implement very flood resilient programs to minimize the frequency, duration, and inundation that this flooding occurs.
Okay, we're going to move on with our task force schedule ahead of us. Obviously, this is a working schedule, and we can certainly amend that as we go forward. But we're going to endeavor to have 4 full working committee meetings between now and when our final report will be due in July 1st of 2023. So with today's meeting, August 22nd, we're going to launch into a period where we'll have subcommittees working, which will be named, and we'll be going over those shortly. And those subcommittees will be convening in September and October, and then we will come back together as a full committee in November. And we're going to really, this is the first meeting. It makes sense to really convene us here in Albany to really set out the work plan. But we want to get out into the field and do site visits and really engage the public more as we go forward with other meetings. And we'll be doing that both through the subcommittee structure and the full committee structure. So 4 meetings, one today, one in November, one envisioned in March of 2023, where we'll really get out into a more public setting after the winter thaw and the beginning of the spring, and then come back with a June meeting in 2023 to determine the nature and the content of our final report. And then you also see a robust series of subcommittee meetings for 2023 each month, January through June of 2023, up to our final report. So all of those are not specifically set in stone, but Kim or a fellow of our staff will be reaching out to all of the task force members, and of course Shane within the public engagement team will also be notifying press and public of the schedule and the content and the agenda for our future subcommittee meetings and our full committee meetings. So let's talk about the subcommittees. Rebecca.
So at this point, we've defined 3 distinct subcommittees who will be working diligently to fulfill the requirements of the legislation and also to share best practices across the task force. The first of these is hydrology and engineering, which will include a review of the really robust library of prior research and study that's been conducted in both of these watersheds. That subcommittee will identify gaps in research that will contribute to the set of recommendations at the conclusion of the task force. And they'll also recommend technical parameters for final recommendations and remediation as defined in the legislation. The second subcommittee is grants and policy. So this subcommittee will identify applicable state and federal resources that might be applied in order to mitigate flooding in the two watersheds. I think we've all heard a lot about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the brand new Inflation Reduction Act. There's also funding available through FEMA's BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, and other federal programs, as well as the forthcoming New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Bond Act, which will be on the ballot this November, a $4.2 billion effort that includes flood mitigation chief among its goals. So this subcommittee will analyze and recommend systems level technical and political solutions. They'll attempt to capture what mitigative tactics might be funded through grant and incentive programs. And they'll also, seek to understand the political framework in which we are operating. So when you think about all of those water management entities in the Oswego River Basin, what are the political mechanisms that can be used in order to have greater coordination in operations? And lastly, public engagement and outreach. As several of you mentioned, that meeting in Cato, New York, was not the first, and it won't be the last. And it was incredibly impactful to hear from the people who are directly impacted by the results of these extreme weather events and flooding. And it's important to us that, first of all, that we've convened under Director Stratton's leadership, that the task force is moving forward and will submit its set of recommendations. And throughout this process, the public engagement and outreach subcommittee will ensure that we're being transparent in how we're running this task force. So we'll very soon set up a website where we'll have recordings of the meetings, minutes, as well as any reference materials that the public might want to explore. And that subcommittee will also perform outreach to various stakeholders, including but not limited to lake associations, water managers, community-based organizations, elected officials, and the people that have been impacted by flooding in these regions. So that's where a lot of the deep work will happen. And the official task force meetings that will be live streamed and held in public forums, or where we'll share distilled findings from those activities. And with that, I'll turn it back to Director Stratton to facilitate any questions from task force members or staff. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. That's a great overview. Howard, thank you for that very informative overview of the dynamics of both the Oswego and the Mohawk River Basin. Clearly a huge territory and a very formidable task ahead for all of us who are members of the Upstate Flood Mitigation Task Force. And again, we're going to be endeavoring not just to conduct these meetings from a conference room, but actually get into the field and meet the stakeholders and to be able to see this. But it is a huge territory. We may have to confine some of our scope of that and also engage our subcommittee chairs and also doing some of that work in the intervening months in between when we convene as a full committee. I would like to allow the opportunity for our task force members to make any additional comments or questions based upon the information that has been presented thus far. And I think if you unmute and we have an indication that there's a chat, but I don't know if we're using the chat.
That's Commissioner Gray indicated that she had to step away at noon.
Okay.
So she was with us for most of the meeting, and I believe that staff representatives as well.
I stepped away. Okay. Commissioner Sagos, do you have anything else to add before we go on to other folks?
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much for that. Just one question on one of those maps showing the, I think, precipitation or the volume inside the canal system. I know there was some anecdotal commentary post 2010, but do we have the actual trend line as well? Or is that still being developed, or can it be?
We definitely do, and the data is all there. The good thing about over the years, we're the Power Authority and Canal Corporation are USGS best friend. As gauges were taken out of service, we either funded them or put new ones in. So we're funding a great deal of stream gauging. So we do have a lot of information. That was just a graphic that went back into since the Barge Canal was created, that Dr. Garver created. So I used it, but definitely we have it. And there's no doubt with climate change, things have changed, and definitely having these repeating cyclonic events that really, I'm kind of waiting for the one for this year, but we don't control it, but we deal with it as they come and try to make the best decisions so we can minimize flooding to the extent possible. What it doesn't do, though, is doesn't show what our activities did to mitigate flooding, which no one ever asks for credit for what new programs do, but in reality, they do a great deal of benefits, and sometimes we forget about that, and we're definitely glad that we can take that information and have a model to go back and say, if the dams were in on the Mohawk, what would the water levels were? And I've done that, and it's amazing. So great question.
Okay, got it. I mean, it'd be great to see an updated chart line on that, and that'll help tell the story of all the work that's gone in already and where we're going forward. But thank you. Otherwise, fantastic.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll go on to other commissioners on the task force. Commissioner Bray has stepped away. Jim Flynn from Department of Transportation, anything you'd like to add to the presentation?
Just want to say thanks. It's great information, creates a great sound basis for moving forward with the task force. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jim. In the room, Bill Neckerman.
Yes, if I may. So we know that a lot of the information we have about flooding looks backwards. FEMA maps look backwards. They don't look forwards. They don't consider land use change. They don't consider climate change. So, and I know also that a few years back, DOT and USGS were working together on kind of a future-looking stream model. So I'm wondering if we can get some information on where that lies and perhaps getting some input from some climate experts such as people at the Northeast Climate Center at Cornell University.
Thank you very much. That will be relayed certainly in the minutes that we put together, and perhaps that could be directed to one of our subcommittees that Rebecca outlined, and that'll be part of the work of their work going forward. So, well, I'd like to see it there and certainly here. Thank you very much. Peter, any comments or questions?
Just the one slide you had that showed all the players, all the other agencies that have control over certain resources or certain assets within the watershed. I thought was very telling. I know speaking, for Schoharie County, obviously our two major players are New York City DEP and Power Authority, and they're great partners to us and to the county in general, as far as communication back and forth, very transparent. Power Authority has been a great partner with flood mitigation. They installed 8 USGS gauges through a contract with USGS. But I don't know that I've often seen those two agencies in the room together with the local stakeholders. So one of the things I would try to encourage is, to get those folks in a room and just have a talk, because I think that can really go a long way in terms of coming to solutions that I think will impact everyone's the constituents, certainly of our local legislators who are represented here as well as others. So
That's a very good comment. Thank you very much, Peter Nichols.
Peter, interestingly enough, we had a meeting. I was the ops engineer at PG for a while and definitely had that separation. We actually had a meeting, very well attended by both the Power Authority and DEP, and we have another one scheduled in September to kind of go tour their facilities. And a lot of new players in both organizations. So it's really timely to definitely ensure that those collaboration and people know who they are and understand what's going on, so we're not surprised with a lot of it.
yeah.
Theodore and Jenny, I'll give you the opportunity if you'd like to comment or ask any questions.
Yeah, thank you. And you can call me Ted.
Ted.
I appreciated all the details shared. I focused more on what Howard Goebel was presenting, and I thank you, Howard, for that detailed narrative, and you peppered it with some great quantitative information. I guess my question is something that we might pursue later in one of the subcommittees, but I'm aware that there is a flood forecasting system in place for the canal. And so my question would be what Howard and his team think of the performance of that system and its ability to allow this committee to perhaps go back and look at some of the historic events that were pointed out as problematic, and then enable us to examine different scenarios through that forecasting system to avoid those floods. And then, as someone mentioned earlier, Bill Meacham perhaps would allow us to then play some future scenarios as we look at climate change and land cover change and see what management strategies occur there. If that flood forecasting system isn't set up to be dynamic and allow for that type of use, I accept that, but it might be one of the recommendations that we then move forward with. Thank you.
You want to say about that, Howard? No?
Well, yeah, we'll get into it in the subcommittees, Ted. Was far more developed in the Mohawk than it was in the Oswego River Basin, and hence some of the challenges that will do it. But I appreciate your insight and your thoughts on next steps. But it is dynamic, definitely dynamic.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Ted. Oren McMurray. Oren, any comments or questions?
No, thank you very much. This has been very informative. As I get up to speed here a little bit more, I'm sure we'll have more discussion in the committees, but excellent information, and appreciate the presentation.
Very good. Robbie, any questions or comments? And hopefully your audio is a little louder.
No, not at this time. Yeah, there's certainly very exciting information and task force goals, and would be, very excited to take part in any of the subcommittees to help out.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to work out all the technical bugs along the way and make sure that for our next meeting, everybody's got full volume and full visual. Hopefully we'll all be in the same room in real time together for a future meeting. And that would be great. Nothing like doing the work in person. Senator Mannion, are you still with us? Let's see, Senator Mannion. Assemblyman Sturpey, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Well, I got a lot more information than I thought we'd get on the first meeting. Usually it's just where's the coffee pot and, the bathrooms are out that door, but that was a great presentation. I'm really looking forward to the final result of all the work we're going to do, and hopefully it'll create a roadmap for a lot of local municipalities for the next decade or so of things they can do to right-size infrastructure to try to handle, the changing weather. It's just different. So, but thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And then Assemblyman Lamondes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to future meetings, and as I said earlier, actions to solve this problem. Thank you very much.
We have a number of, thank you very much, Assemblyman. We have a number of other agency staff members. Any of the other agency folks that are with us would like to comment on behalf of their agencies? Hearing none. Anyone in the
We
room?
can open it to anyone else on the Zoom if they'd like to unmute and ask the
Okay.
question or make a comment. We will wrap up promptly at 12:30 just to respect everyone's calendars, but we do have some time if folks have questions. And Shane, I don't know if you've received any by
No
email.
questions coming in on email. Does anyone else who was on the Zoom have a question or comment that they'd like to unmute and direct to the task force? And if you do so, unmute, maybe wave so I can see who is okay. Marie Doyle, are you waving? You have to unmute, Marie, so we can hear you.
I don't have any questions.
All right. Well, we do hear you. Thank you. No questions. Okay. Anyone else who's on the screen would like to chime in, ask a question? You won't be so shy next time, I'm sure.
I don't think that's Maureen.
So Maureen, it was Maureen Doyle.
Is that
Oh,
right?
Marie. Okay, Marie. No, Marie. And then Maureen Doyle, do you have a question? I see a lot of working going on the screen, and you might be talking, but we can't hear you because you're on mute. If you would like to send a question into Shane on email, we can do that too, but.
I got it.
There we are. Very good. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry. Whoops. Okay, so
Introduce yourself.
one topic that wasn't mentioned is filling. I'm talking within the Oswego River Basin, specifically in Reach 24, Cross Lake, Seneca River, massive filling every year for years. I'm talking 10-wheel truckloads of fill is little. We're talking 20, 30 10-wheel truckloads of fill. Sometimes they're permitted, sometimes they aren't permitted. And I'm hoping that the task force will have time to address that topic in regards to Cross Lake Seneca River. Thank you, and thank you for letting the public participate.
Thank you, Maureen. Your comments are noted and will be passed along to our subcommittee chairs. We are reaching the end of our allotted time. We're very close to it. Any other comments or questions from those of us who are on screen? Shane, nothing coming in by email. I want to also thank the members of our team who are with us, and I didn't get a chance to introduce everyone. Peter Casper, our attorney, our counsel, Shane Mahar, who is with us from our public engagement team, Jackie Schillinger from our intergovernmental relations team, and far in the corner and off camera is Kim Orapello, and Kim will be communicating with each of you about our next meetings, and we will be reaching out to form our subcommittees, to name chairs, and to communicate that to the full members of the task force as we go forward. Once again, to reiterate our commitment to work collectively to come up with a workable plan that we can have to manage this very complex system, and to engage the public and to get out in the field and really see the work that needs to be done. And I want to thank everyone again for their commitment and their time and their pledge to work together. We've got a lot of work to get done in a very short period of time to get our task force report in by July of next year. Rebecca, anything else? No. Well, thank you all for being with us. Senators, Assemblyman, thank you so much. Chairs, Commissioner Sakos, thank you for your engagement and your comments, and come with us out on the canal.
Sounds great, Brian. I'll see you there.
All right, great. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.